Okay. Good morning, Village.
Good morning.
I am so glad that all of you are here today. My name is Tyler Stitt, and I am the church planting resident here. We're in the middle of a series called What's Your Story?, in which we are exploring how we understand our own story, as well as how God understands our story. We're guided along this biblical journey by the character Joseph. This was just one of my favorites. He's so interesting. And his story is especially useful for this series because it follows a classic diagram of a story, which some of you might remember from school. Remember this? Did any of you have an English teacher that was like, exposition, rising action, climax? That's what we're doing now. So, I see that some of you are visitors here. Yes, love that there are visitors. Please, if you've been here before, go and find a visitor and say hi. So, since some of you are visitors, I'll do a speed review of the last 3 weeks that I've done. So, okay, speed review. Joseph is the youngest of 12, and he's obviously the favorite of his dad because his dad gave him a special robe that was very fancy and colorful. And Joseph is the youngest of these 11 brothers, and so one morning he kind of like twirls down like the morning person that we love to hate. It's like, hey guys, guess what? I just had a dream, and we were all gathering wheat, and my wheat stood up all nice and straight, and all of your wheat bowed down to me. Then he twirled away, and his brothers were like, we hate that guy. And then the next morning he came up, and he twirled it, and was like, hey guys, I just had another dream. Everyone get around, Mom, Dad, and my 11 brothers. So there was a sun and a moon and 11 stars, and all of them bowed down to me again. So funny, and his brothers just grew redder and redder with anger. And one day the brothers are out in the field watching some sheep, doing whatever sheep do. And then there comes Joseph down the hill, just a little puke of sunshine among the sheep and the grass. And his brothers cracked their knuckles and sighed and said, yeah, this guy needs to die. So they rolled up, this is the Bible, folks, and so they rolled up their shepherd's sleeves and they picked up their shepherd's stick like a baseball bat, and they were just about to kill this guy, but Reuben, one of the brothers, had a tinge of older brother guilt and said, maybe we shouldn't kill him. Maybe we can just throw him into a pit and call it a day. And they were like, oh, okay. So Joseph comes gallivanting down. He's like, hey guys, what's up? And they took Joseph and they took off his special robe and they walked him over to the pit and threw him into the pit. And Joseph was like, shoot. And as the brothers were walking away, wiping their hands on Joseph's fancy robe, they encountered some Ishmaelites, and Judah, who was apparently the business major of the family, was like, instead of just leaving Joseph in the pit, we should sell him into slavery to these guys and make a little bit of money. And so they're like, okay. And so they go back, and Joseph finds himself in slavery, and he's like, double shoot. So then, the brothers, they said to each other what brothers throughout all of human history have said to each other. What are we going to tell Dad? So they kill a goat, because, they dip the robe in the blood, and they bring this dripping robe to the dad, and they're like, so this happened. And the dad is completely inconsolable because he realizes that Joseph died his favorite son, and he was completely inconsolable. Dad, make a completely inconsolable son. So they make him a captain of the slaves, and he has a captain. His boss is named Potiphar, and I guess like all the slave work has like done a good thing for Joseph's physique, and being put into a pit kind of made like an Owen Wilson thing going on. Because all of a sudden he's very handsome, and so he's working for this guy named Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife is like, "Who is that?" So she like. To Joseph, and it's like, hey, do you want to go lie down for a bit? And Joseph, oh, and by the way, as a captain, he had clothes again. So Joseph was like, hey, no thanks. So he starts to walk away, but one thing led to the other, and then Potiphar's wife took off his clothes. And he was like, why am I naked for so much of this story? Anyway, Potiphar's wife was still, frustrated. And so she was not about to be humiliated, so she had Potiphar throw him into the dungeon. And Joseph was like, triple shoot. As he was put into the deepest depths of shadow that he'd ever been in. Right, and so that's a review for the last 3 weeks. So now we're all here in the dungeon. And fortunately for Joseph, 2 other people were arrested with him. And so there's the cupbearer of the Pharaoh, that he used to work for the Pharaoh, bearing the cup. And then there was the baker of the Pharaoh. And so they all get thrown into the dungeon. And one night, the cupbearer and the baker have a wild dream. And they wake up, and they're like pacing the floor because they don't know what this dream means. Joseph, like in his chains, is like, hey, what's up? And they're like, well, we got this dream, and we don't know what it means, and it's like driving us wild. And he's like, I don't have anything else to do. Want to talk about it? So, fortunately, at this point, God has given him a gift, and that gift is to be able to interpret dreams. So, they tell Joseph their dreams, and I'm skimming here, but Joseph hears it and interprets it by the grace of God. And he says, good news, cupbearer. You're going to be free. Pharaoh's going to hire you back, and you're going to get right back where you were. Just try to remember me while I'm in prison, because I'm still in the dungeon, and it would be great if I could be free. And then the baker's like, oh, that sounds good. Well, what about me? And he's like, good news, baker. Pharaoh's going to cut off your head and put it on a stick, and then birds are going to eat your face. Oh, did I say good news? I mean, and then 3 days later, sure enough, the cupbearer was brought up to the throne room, and he joined Pharaoh, and everything was great, and the baker became bird food. Right. And so, it's the Bible, folks. It happens. So that brings us to the falling action, which is where we are today. And that's what we're talking about. So Joseph is left in prison, twiddling his thumbs for about 2 years, because the cupbearer just, forgot about him. Like, oops, I didn't write down in my planner to save the person who saved my life. Sorry. And so he's up there with Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh has, what do you know? A dream. And you might even say that a dream is a motif in this story. So the dream is really cool. We kind of read it. I'm not going to go over it again. But it involves like a cow eating another cow, a plant eating another plant, because that happens. And Pharaoh woke up, and he was obviously very troubled by this. And so he calls together all the wise people, all of the advisors and the PhDs and the psychotherapists and the rocket scientists. And he tells them this dream about a cow being eaten by a cow. And everyone's like, I don't know. And so, meanwhile, the cupbearer is back here, bearing his cup. And he's like, a dream that no one can interpret. Where have I been? When have I been here before? It feels so... Oh, shoot! And so he goes up to the Pharaoh, and he bows, and in front of all the people, he's like, so there might be a guy in the dungeon who can interpret any dream that you tell him. I bet you wish that I told you that before you gathered this whole group of people and told them your kind of psychotic dream. casted down into the dungeon, and Pharaoh pulls him up. You can tell that Joseph had aged a little bit in that 2 years, as people do age when they're put in jail for no reason. Hello, Cook County Jail, talking to you. And he walks into the light, the sun streaming down some of his already forming wrinkles, and Pharaoh tells him this wild dream. And Joseph receives an interpretation from God and tells it to Pharaoh. He says, "The dream is from God, and it's a warning. You will have 7 years of abundance, and then you're going to have 7 years of famine. So you're going to have a bunch of food for 7 years, and then no food for 7 years. And it's going to be really, really rough. Like, people aren't even going to remember the abundant time, because they're going to be starving during that time." And he didn't stop at that. Joseph told Pharaoh that he has a plan. So, for the first 7 years of abundance, the government is going to collect 20% of the crops of abundance. And then they're going to save that for the 7 years of famine. Because there is seriously going to be no one with food. The entire region is going to be without food. And we have to save it for people. And Joseph said, "You have to pick someone to be in charge of this." And Pharaoh was obviously impressed, and so he told Joseph, "I will set you over the land of Egypt, and you're going to be my right-hand person, second in command." And he dressed Joseph in the finest of clothes. Now, if you're an English major, you know that this story is not really resolved, because who has Joseph not talked to? His brothers and his dad. And we don't really know how Joseph's first dream has anything to do with anything, besides just being a 17-year-old who's really, really arrogant. So all of that will be resolved in Chris's sermon next week. But right now, we're talking about the falling conflict. And the falling conflict, you might remember from your English diagram, is about transforming conflict. And if there's anything that I remember from my community organizing training that I went to at CRS at Orion, it was amazing, is that power is an important part of transforming conflict. So let's look at two dynamics of power in this story. So I'm going to make a small point, and then I'm going to make a big point. Here's the small point. The small point is about Pharaoh, who is ironically the most powerful person in the story by community standards. He rules over the Nile, which is the breadbasket of the entire region. He commands an incredible military, and as we saw with the baker, he can cut people's heads off and feed them to birds. And Pharaoh shows us a responsible way for people in power and people with privilege to work within systems. Because what did Pharaoh do? He called all the advisors together, and then when none of them had answers, he heard that this other guy, this slave, had an answer. And he didn't say, well, that Hebrew or that Jewish person they wouldn't have said Jewish, that Israelite person would have nothing to say about the Egyptian kingdom. That slave would have nothing to do with me being the ruler. He didn't say that. He said, all right, bring him in. And he pulled up Joseph out of a system that kept trying to put him down. And that's the little point that I'm trying to make. So acknowledge the privilege you have and use it to help people without it.